We're doing a roundtable. People are kind of set up like a panel, but we're just in that these are the constraints of the environment that we work in. And so what we're going to do is we're going to cover 3 topics in the next 90 minutes. Okay, we're going to talk about transgender people being banned from the military. We're going to talk a little bit about the DSM diagnosis of gender dysphoria and the World Health Organization's recent move with the ICD-11 that's coming out not until 2022. We're going to talk about how that's been moved to a new chapter on sexual health rather than being classified as a mental disorder. And then we're going to talk about Trans Day of Remembrance and violence against trans women of color. So these are like very hot topics. These are things that, that are in the media right now, and you're going to get to hear queer and trans people's perspectives on the issues, how they're being presented in the media, okay? So I'll be kind of like facilitating that discussion, trying to keep us on track. We've only got 30 minutes per topic. Gender Health Center team, would you mind introducing yourselves, your pronouns, and your kind of role in this agency or your relationship to the work? Does anyone want to start us off?
All right. Hi, again. I'm Finley, Counseling Program Manager, they, them pronouns. You can use he, him. They, them are my preference.
Hi, I'm Alejandro. I go by he, him, and they. I am the Healthcare Services Director here. So that means I oversee a lot of our healthcare programming, our clinic services. I also do some direct services, enrollment, stuff like that.
Hi, my name is Jasmine. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am the clinic program manager and a peer health navigator for the Triumph study.
Hi, I'm Esperance. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns. I have no preference currently. I'm a lead trans peer advocate, so I do a lot of intake appointments. So I meet up with the community members. Usually I'm the first person they meet. I kind of like assess what their needs are, what they would like, and make those referrals.
Hi, my name's Ayo Tunde. My pronouns are they, them exclusively. And I also have the same position as Esperance. I'm a lead trans peer advocate here. I also do intake, and we, like Esperance said, we basically assess what folks' needs are and get them directed to the relevant services.
And so I'm Alex, Director of Programs here, they pronouns. Okay, so the first topic is trans people are banned from the military, and so I'm just going to read a couple of sentences from this article that came out on February 5th of this year in The Pulse, which is an LGBT-focused news source. And it says, Trump administration has successfully banned transgender people from the military. I hope I'm going to pronounce this right. The Mattis Plan, is that how that word is? Has anyone heard that word? Is being referred to as the course of action that the government is taking to bar all trans people from the military. The plan states, anyone who does not live in their biological sex, anyone who requires or has undergone gender transition, and anyone whose gender dysphoria or history of gender dysphoria who requires a change of gender or who does not live as their biological sex. And so these are all the descriptions that are being used to refer to transgender people under this new policy. And then it does go on to say that people who are service members that have been stable in their gender transition for the last 3 years, so that they've completed surgeries and have been taking hormones for 36 months or more, and who have and service members who have been already diagnosed with gender dysphoria before joining the military or before the policy comes into place are able to stay. And let's see here. And then there's an advocate from the LGBT Research and Communications Project, Laura Durso, who says that this policy prevents the inclusion of trans people in public life, and that this may be the step that starts a bigger movement to remove all trans people not only from the military but from regular life indefinitely. So just to like turn to our folks here, I'm just kind of wondering if folks can like identify what you think the real issues are that are underlying this policy, and like what your perspective is on that.
So one thing that, like, as a person from a lower class background, who has had many family members over time headhunted for the military, because that's part of the point, right? Poor people make good people who are willing to die for very little money. So then, like, if that's kind of an approach that our military is already taking, and then now, and has been for decades and decades, and now it's like, we know trans people are economically disenfranchised, like, at huge levels, but now we're also going to remove this potential avenue of anything that isn't really much of anything, but it's still presented as one. People tracking. Okay.
What else?
My biggest issue with it is not just the fact that it's targeting the trans demographic, but it's setting a precedent within like legislation to discriminate against anybody and bar anybody. Because once you can justify any demographic not being able to be a part of something, especially if that's going to make them economically stable possibly, then you're able to kind of expand upon that and choose kind of other victims essentially being backed by the state. And so that's another reason why it's really important that we kind of stay vigilant, but also very vocal about our support of trans people and letting them know that they're not alone, that the majority of people who may not recognize that we're actually human, that there is still those people who do support us. Because I mean, when you tend to look at news and the word trans is involved, it's rarely ever positive.
So it's like an identity-based exclusion that is problematic. Yeah, I see other people nodding to that comment.
There was a quote from a Colonel Carla M. Gleason in the article that says, "It is critical that the Department of Justice be permitted to implement personnel policies that it determines are necessary to ensure the most lethal and combat-effective fighting force in the world." And I think that's problematic as fuck, to be honest. Like, not all people in the military are on the front lines shooting and killing people. There are tons of people in administrative work, in the health, the health industry, within like the military. And so there's a whole lot of opportunities for folks that are not a part of the lethal fighting force of our country that can serve in any capacity. So to just focus on the fact that this concept of like unit cohesion that people always talk about, that let's say even back then, like when we had Don't Ask, Don't Tell, like gay people couldn't be out because there was this problem with unit cohesion if your partners or like co-people knew something about you that was like you're attracted to them or whatever. There's this whole problematic situation that people can't have interpersonal relationships with queer or trans people and actually work as a unit. It's just like a complete fallacy, I think.
I feel like kind of touching on what Tunde was saying, like it is one of the many steps the government takes to disenfranchise the whole community. Because you could think of like being in the military as just a symbolic gesture, like being able to serve the country, meaning you are represented as an American. And when you can't necessarily participate in that bravery and solidarity with the nation, it's like it becomes this thing where we become alienated from the concept of being an American and what it means to be American. But I also want to bring up like the fact that the U.S. military is responsible for a lot of genocide across the whole world. And like I know many trans people of color have actually been like, well, I don't care if trans people can't join the military because that means we can't participate in imperialism. Which is true, because there's trans people not just in the U.S. that matter, but like across the globe. There's trans people in Venezuela, and there's a lot of things happening in Venezuela right now. There's trans people like in just a lot of places that the U.S. kind of occupies and tries to overthrow. So it's like it's a very nuanced conversation, because it comes like, obviously I want the trans people to have some kind of outlet, to have financial stability and some kind of assurance, but at the same time know what you're participating in. Yeah, so it kind of gets into like this kind of fickle kind of thing, and like I see a lot of sides to it, but I would say it's just like it's still important to call out the fact that this ban was made legal, because again it's like it's starting that process of like eventually getting us out of like what society thinks we're participating in. So yeah.
Yeah, I actually kind of hear you like tying together a few of the points here, like what Finley was saying about that this is like often one of the only economic opportunities for poor people, right? And then also this like, you know, this idea of like nationalism, of like full citizenship participation looks like being able to be a part of this like lethal force that is actually perpetuating, in some cases, harm, you know, on other people around the world. And like what I wonder, like I'm just curious, like for folks here, like what that means to like, you know, like when trans people's own survival is like often tied to like economic survival, and then that the pathway to do that is like this type of nationalism where it's actually like like, you know what I mean, where yeah, like what about that seems like it's just a very complex kind of like thing to hold.
Yeah, I would say like it's a cycle, because like the military, particularly, at least where I grew up, what's that? It's like the youth kind of like recruitment. I forget the name of it, but they like target like poor Black and brown communities because they want to obviously take those folks in, because those are disposable bodies, at least in the view of the U.S. So it is a cycle, because it's like it's something that the U.S. government is like needs to be held accountable for. It's like they target these like marginalized communities to join the military, because obviously it's not going to be the wealthy class, the white wealthy class that's going to be joining the military, even though they're the ones who have like the most, I guess, power in the U.S. And so it's been like from the beginning, like it's just been poor people dying for their country, and it's a symbolic gesture. It's almost like sacrifice, but it's kind of really deeper than that.
It's like brainwashed sacrifice, right? Like, here you're gonna do this thing, and it's going to have this like impact for the people who you are a part of, but really like you were never actually part of the people in control or in power in the first place.
Right, they can care less if you live or die.
Right.
There's also a lot of like Black veterans that even they're like once they like they're a veteran and come back, and like they faced racism, like anti-Black racism, like to the extremes, even though they served the country and were like defending the nation. So it's like it's very much like a kind of faux I guess solidarity and like idea that you're participating with the nation, versus being used.
Well, and institutional racism too, right? Like you don't get the same like opportunities to purchase land like other veterans did, right? Like it wasn't just like discriminatory like individual acts, right? It was still like in policy. Yeah, that's like super fucked up. I kind of want to return to something Ayotunde said around this like identity based like ban that's super slippery and like I don't know, to me it like it's very Holocaust era y, you know, and then like the language of at least of the policy in this article seems to, you know, not maybe like solely, but is very much focused on this diagnosis of gender dysphoria, and like identifying people based on a diagnosis, and that this diagnosis is being leveraged as a reason for some people to be able to stay, but then is also being leveraged as a reason to exclude people. And you know, like, and this I might bleed into a bit into our next conversation, but just to kind of keep it focused here, like, you know, we are not a pathology, right? And yet that's the tool that's being used for this ban, rather than it being like actually another way of like how is it that we've come to be like our identity is based on a diagnosis, like, you know what I mean? I don't know if I don't think I'm being super clear right now, but like
even the language like of around how they're going to exclude or include people, like living in your genitals. I'm sorry, what does it look like to live in my biological sex? Because if I could and make money doing it, I'm pretty sure this is not what I'd be doing. Like what is living in that? So it's this arbitrary turn of phrase kind of thing that then can be interpreted however is useful for the people in power in the moment at hand, right? And it also has implications then about like non-trans people, right? The language they're using in regards to how to exclude us also then, I mean, probably is not being analyzed, but you can sort of flip like, okay, so what are they saying about the people that they are looking for, like, nuance?
Yeah.
Plus, it just, whenever these conversations come up, they tend to just ignore the existence of intersex people. So it's like, what are you going to do with intersex people if your basis for exclusion or inclusion is on genitalia, when genitalia itself is also not binary, and that's just like a solid fact. It's not anything that we have to debate about. It's just that's what it is, and it falls through the cracks. Like, it's already flawed in that they can't even acknowledge all the layers to what they're even trying to bring into fruition.
The military has a long history of excluding people with health issues, and the fact that they're conflating now that transgender or being transgender is a health issue into those other long lists of exclusionary things that they include is hugely problematic, because we know that being transgender is not, again, a pathology. It's an identity, and when you conflate those two things, that leads to a very, very slippery slope in which now transgender people can potentially be pathologized in different sectors of our society because they fall into whatever this long list of exclusionary things that the military is doing. Right? If you have any history of psychosis, you can't be in the military. If you have any history of whatever it is, or living with HIV, you can't be in the military. So there's like a long list of barring things. And there's essentially a lot of things that we as citizens can't do because the military is so... They govern themselves internally. They have their own judicial system. They have their own way of doing things that are outside of our federal laws. And so it's even harder for us to change this system or influence this system because they're just this very kind of private group of folks that are making their own internal decisions without the rest of the country.
What might a more like just outcome be regarding transgender people and the military? Would that look like trans people being included in the military? Is that like what people's versions of justice is? Is it something else?
Well,
I mean, ideally, I'm not into the military, but that's not realistic. So, I mean, I'm very about autonomy over everything as long as someone else is not being harmed. So if someone should have the choice whether they're trans or not to be able to join the military, no matter how I feel about the military. That's kind of the most important thing, and just taking away someone's choice to do something to where it's not even an option or something that they can decide for themselves is just another act of like subordination, like forced subordination in some kind of way. So, I mean, ideally we should have the choice, and also since they get funded with so much money, everything that person wants while serving should be covered, no problem, no questions asked.
Mm-hmm.
There was like a mention in the article that it was like something like a maximum of like $8 million annually that like trans medical costs could be, and that's out of a medical budget of $6 billion.
Yeah.
So it's like yeah, and that's typically been what this debate is about the cost of transgender surgeries, which is like ridiculous.
Right, and if we're gonna talk about cost of lives, like, that's a whole other level of discussion when we're talking about the military and, like, not even just, like, veterans in healthcare, which is its own huge thing, right? Or even people on active duty in healthcare. Huge things. But now, if we're gonna actually consider what the implications are here, talking about, like, value of bodies, like, in a very monetized way in addition to a weaponized way, like...
I think for me, a just vision would mean that providers within the military become aware of how their policies affect trans people, because they're the ones, they're the doctors and those like the people that are not doing any actual like fighting. Those are the people making the policies, and those are the people deciding like, I'm the doctor and you have this dysphoria so you can't participate. And so those are the people that we need to affect change in, right? Those social workers, those LCSWs, those MDs that are actually making those clinical decisions, and those clinical decisions that inform all these other policies. So having them be educated in appropriate trans care is vital to the changing of policies. And I think transparency with like what are the exclusions of the military. I don't think any of us know truly what the long list of exclusions are. And as citizens, I think it's really valuable for the military to be transparent.
This is a bit of an older article. It's from June of 2018, and this was in the Pink News Daily, another LGBTQ newsletter. So the World Health Organization announces it finally no longer classifies being transgender as a mental disorder. Woot woot. So the WHO announced that they are reclassifying gender incongruence, and that this is being hailed as a strong message. They say there is no evidence that gender incongruence is a mental disorder, and that they have revised their international classification of diseases and plan to release. They say that the release of this information should help combat the stigma that trans people face. So the international classification of diseases is used for lots of reasons, for public health reasons. It's also used for billing purposes and like healthcare systems, right, and mental health systems. And here in the US, we have our own other disease classification, right, the DSM, right, and that's a book of mental disorders, and gender incongruence or gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder or whatever it's been called in all of its renditions in the US has always been based in this mental disorder book, this psychiatric book. And so World Health Organization is taking this step to like move this category out of mental disorders and place it with things like sexual health conditions. And they say that this reclassification, that classifying gender incongruence as a mental disorder has caused enormous stigma for trans people, and it also means that trans people have significant healthcare needs, and that these healthcare needs will be better met if it's coded as a sexual health condition rather than a mental disorder. They say that trans people will be able to access more appropriate care than they would have previously done, and that this is intended to reduce barriers to care, and that they're intending to send a very strong message to the rest of the world, aka the US, that this is not a mental disorder. Okay? And then the article goes on about stuff in the UK. So what do people think about this move? And oh, by the way, this will come into effect. This is how long policy takes. ICD-11 is going to be released in 2022, and they came to this decision last year, right? So that's like 4 years out to put this policy into effect. So what do people think about this reclassification of gender incongruence as a sexual health condition?
I think I think the premise is solid, but the timeline that they are kind of presenting in it is like completely unrealistic if you look at any other timeline of anything in healthcare or mental health, like between the time something is depathologized or decriminalized or declassified as one thing and reclassified as something else, and the time that it like takes generations of retraining, and like before that is I'm gonna say normalized, even though I'm kind of side-eye about that as well. So it's a good move, I think. Overall, I'm glad it's happening, and also like without serious, intentional, high level like training and pushing of like this paradigm shift, it's going to be meaningless on the individual level probably for quite some time.
Okay.
I definitely want to acknowledge that the DSM has historically caused harm to our community, queer people and trans people, and it continues to do so. The DSM has been used to pathologize the human experience in a lot of ways. And also it's a valuable tool we have when we actually see something that is clinically important. And we have to be really mindful and careful of how we use this tool. I mean, this book was created by psychiatrists, and it was grabbed onto by the healthcare industry and is now being used as a tool for reimbursement and for capitalism. And that's also something to keep in mind when you're using this tool. And the fact that they're declassifying it as one thing and moving it into another only highlights the point that this tool is still being used for monetary value and gain in the healthcare industry and putting our communities into one section of billing to another section of billing. I do find it really important that it is no longer being classified as a mental health issue, because often mental health clinicians like to insert themselves in the lives of people for the fact that they just want to make themselves important, and still relevant in the lives of certain communities, especially trans people or queer people, because of the history of the DSM. And I also see positives in this as being classified as like a sex and gender thing, because when things are classified into that area, it actually, as far as healthcare goes, you're able to access more things because it's in that section. Your minors might be able to access care differently and maybe privately without parental consent now, or could be a lot of different things could come out of this, and policies can change from this. So it could and has the potential to have positive ramifications.
You hit a number of really important points there. So like access to healthcare without having to go through mental health, which would like really change trans healthcare access, and then so like right now in sexual and reproductive health, like minors can access like certain like reproductive health, like birth control or abortions or different safe sex supplies without needing a parent's consent, even when they're a minor. And so that could open that doorway up for like access to hormones or whatever is what you're saying, right? Yeah. Okay. And then the other thing, I think one of the other things I heard you say that is, it doesn't change that we've created this health system that is based on, like billing. In order to be paid, there's got to be some kind of diagnosis or condition, and there's not getting around that. That's not a solution in this policy change. That system will remain intact, that you don't just get access to healthcare because you're human and you need it. You get access to healthcare because there's something billable wrong with you. Okay, cool. Are there is there somewhere there that anyone else wants to pick up? No. Okay, cool. Let's see here. I'm just gonna look through my questions and see if you've hit everything that I came up with. So maybe we can just talk a little bit about healthcare delivery right now, and with the current system in place, what would look different if, like, today, right now, we had avenues to access healthcare that reflected that gender incongruence was just like a billing code in a sexual and reproductive health section instead of like a diagnosis as a mental condition in the DSM? How might our work here look differently?
Doctors might like actually just, do their job when you go to see them.
Can you elaborate on that?
Well, like, they may have actually had to learn about the thing in class for, how to just be basically covered in this basic area of sexual and gender. Like, if that were to just magically be a thing that now is, not being pathologized in that way, then in at least in my ideal world, that means that, doctors just kind of know about it and are just going to be like, oh, okay, so this birth control didn't work well for you, let's try this other type. Like, oh, so you don't like that type of hormones, let's like work on this other one.
Okay, so just more like inclusion in primary healthcare. Do other people want to add things in there?
I remember this one doctor in community saying that there could never be enough assessment done on trans people. And I think, right, like, what are you assessing for? Why are you the decision maker or the owner of this person's experience? Like, in assessing a trans person, there's not enough. So hopefully, I think with this change in policy, it will help clinicians reduce their need to assess trans people and queer people in this work. Reduce the need to write these letters of support or clearance that this person is trans and needs this. Like, it just there could be so many things that clinicians can like let go of, and that people can actually live authentically without having to be diagnosed or like go into a room where they already probably have trauma experiencing and having to go in and say like, hi, validate my existence, write me a letter please.
Right, vasectomy, please.
Right, and so hopefully that'll change with this change, like incongruency, and remove clinicians from the equation, or at least put them in another part of the equation where they might provide better access and better care, and it's actually providing therapy instead of assessment.
Yeah, totally. That could be like a real game changer. Hey, it's like, why do we shouldn't need a mental health clearance letter if there's no classification of a diagnosis as a mental health condition. Then that could eliminate that gatekeeping, and then people could access mental health care because they want to, and not because
They have to.
they have to.
And because they can, because healthcare itself is a privilege that a lot of everyday people don't have. And so when you look at
Exactly.
trans people who are, statistically even more marginalized than the average person, even getting to the step of even being able to say I have healthcare is already a battle on its own. And then once they finally cross that battle and now they're part of the pool of the privileged people, they're not getting the same care that everybody else is getting, which is just basic human care. And so it's like, I have healthcare, but do I really have healthcare? Because I'm not getting seen, and I had the surgery plan, and now I have to cancel, and now they're canceling on me, and now I have all these different letters. People don't have transportation. People can barely afford their rent. Like, I have to do survival sex work in the meantime while trying to wait for all this to work itself out. And there's just so many different things built against people that even having them, retention is a thing, and that's something that trans people are lacking, because why would you want to continue to go through an establishment where you're constantly marginalized over and over and over, when it's the one place that should actually be validating your identity compared to any other place that you're going to encounter?
Totally.
So.
Those are like really great points, and like even that the appropriate pathway to access care right now is to go and make this visit, and then to go and see this specialist, and then to go and this other one, and then
Right.
and that you have like 4 or 5 appointments to get what you need
One
when
thing.
someone else could have one, right?
Which may lead to a denial, so you're not even guaranteed going through all that different things after coordinating your transportation and your schedule and all these different things to get a denial or whatever the case may be, when you shouldn't be getting denied in the first place. And then you might have to get legal people involved, and that's a whole nother batch of possible trauma that someone may have, dealing with the state, dealing with lawyers, all that stuff, if they can't even afford to.
Yeah.
So it's like it's very multi-layered, and that's another thing to like keep in mind. It's not someone just asking for something, whether they deserve it or not, but there's also so many layers and battles just to even attempt to get that thing.
Yeah, I think that's like a really great point. Like the very cis-centric like approach to trans care has been like assuming that all of this like gatekeeping is in place for like the well-being of trans people and to make sure that like we're ready and the right people are getting care, but actually it can have like the appropriate channels and like a typical experience of accessing trans care can have devastating impacts on people's like mental health, and yeah, like it's like super backwards.
I feel could just lead to a person just like internalizing this fact that like something is wrong with me because I am having to, I don't have a choice to want these services because I have to. This is the healthcare system and the way this is built is requiring me to go and see these people when I don't actually think something's wrong, but the system is telling me that there's something wrong.
Yeah.
It's really a messed up situation.
And then people get there and providers aren't even, like Finley was saying earlier, they're not even competent about trans stuff. So oftentimes I have to explicitly tell people in my appointments at this point now, like, expect that you may know more than them. And in fact, at this point, you should know more than them because it's likely that they're not going to know what they're talking about, and you're going to end up getting referred to someone that you don't need to be getting referred to. For example, when trans people are trying to get their hormones, they should be able to get that from their primary care provider. Some providers don't know that or will outright deny them. So sometimes you have the I don't know batch. You're like, well, I don't know. I don't do trans stuff, so I can't get it done for you. Maybe you have to go somewhere else and then refer them to like a gynecologist or somebody else, which is another whole step when they can be giving it to them. Or they'll just be like, I don't do that stuff. You don't get that from me. And then they're like, okay, well, then who do I get it from? Because I was told that my provider is supposed to be giving it to me. And then it becomes this loop and this like web of misinformation, and at that point that person's again burnt out, and now we just lost retention, and now they're suffering because they're not getting their needs when all it took for them to get that need was that initial appointment saying, hey, I'm trans, I need more hormones, okay, give me my prescription, done. It should be that simple, but it never really is.
Did anyone else have a comment on that? Sorry, I didn't make eye contact with you before I
like,
moved on.
everything's pretty much covered. I feel like
Okay.
very much that. I know I've had issues with trying to access hormones myself for like the wildest reasons. Where it's just like I had like a low blood count or something like that, and then they didn't want to prescribe me anything because it was a hazard. When I know for a fact those same doctors could prescribe many things that are hazardous to me anyway, regarding just general health and things like that. But it's also like, it's like I gave up after once I got shut down once. I was like, okay, I'm giving up. I don't want to do this no more. And then I worked here, and then it just worked out. But yeah, I feel like it's a lot of kind of like that where people just kind of give up because it's like it's not worth it to constantly be dehumanized and like shut down. And yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot, and it's like again, like Anthony was mentioning, it's like coming from like a poor background where you don't really have access to healthcare generally, like getting to the point where you finally do have healthcare, just to be like, okay, that was actually just like the first door, and then there's like a couple of other, like there's so many things to go through. We're trying to access all this. But yeah, it's a lot.
So the last kind of question I want to pose to folks is that so this article came out last summer on the World Health Organization's move to like clearly define trans people as not mentally disordered, and then like just last week we have this like trans military ban here in the U.S. and I just like I think this is like classic U.S. fashion where the world is like, we're moving in this direction, and the U.S. is like, fuck you, we're going our own way, but here they are like creating policy based on this other diagnosis as a mental disorder that like there is like general consensus in like health and public policy and in mental health that this is not a mental disorder. There's certainly outliers, but like globally there is consensus about that, regardless of whether people want to remove it from the DSM or not. And yet like this is like I think like kind of going to what Ayotunde had brought up earlier, like a real consequence of this description of a population being housed the way it is, and the impact that it can have at a population level. I'm wondering if people have like just kind of any thoughts or anything else they want to add about that.
I think it's like super important for queer clinicians and trans clinicians to exist, like, and inform policy. Like these are like very macro level concepts that have micro level impacts. And I think by you folks being here and by all of us being here as like community and like leadership, like we need to insert ourselves in these positions of power and become licensed to inform the policies that affect our communities, right? Like, and if we don't have representation at those top echelons, like we're just gonna continue to have these fucked up policies put on us. And it's not hard. I mean, it's super hard for us to get into these positions of power and leadership because we're marginalized, we're disenfranchised. The system is continuously telling us that we're not good enough and not giving us opportunity. And also our community is super resilient, super fucking resilient. And so I know that over time, and hopefully with the work that we're doing here at Gender Health Center and training queer and trans interns and therapists, that they then go and impact policy on a wider scale.
Did you have some comments?
I mean, I was just thinking, I don't know if it's like obvious, but I just think that another thing to factor in is like, yeah, there's our trans identity too, but then if you add in another intersection, like if someone's also of color and they're trans, that just adds a whole other layer of discrimination. And oftentimes it's double discrimination. You have yourself being discriminated not only because you're trans, but also because you're black, brown, whatever, identity you're a part of. And, being someone that has a college degree in itself is also another privilege. And those who are in the healthcare system, when trans people are trying to navigate, are oftentimes white people as well. So if they're cis and they're also white, they may be lacking the trans competency, but then that's also another layer that they're also lacking when it comes to providing that care. And stats research has also shown that certain demographics just aren't receiving the care like their counterparts are, and so that's even more people that are lacking the proper care that they should be getting. That's basic care, and that's a basic humanity. So those are also other things to consider when people are, trying to seek services from you, or you hear conversations about certain people or certain things, and just keeping that, at the forefront of your mind about how much people are actually going through, and how much it actually took for them to even get to you once you're seeing them. Imagine what their story is, just like trying to humanize that, because I think it's easy for everything to kind of like become blurred and it become like a one size fits all like mindset as far as trying to recognize someone's suffering, but the intersections really do play a distinct factor in that person's reality and their experience when it comes to care, and it will vary. So.
Thank you. Any other comments or any other like suggestions for healthcare providers or mental health providers, allies?
I just always find it funny that like doctors go through 10 plus years of training just to not even be able to pull blood and like just offer basic ass kind of services for trans people. Because it's like I've gone to the clinic here and it's like that's it. That's what most doctors can't do or don't want to do because they just never done it. And it's very easy to learn, so I just found it very frustrating that doctors, even when a doctor's like, oh, I don't do that or I've never done that, it's like, well, you're a physician, you've probably done a lot of research yourself for many different things. Why don't you just look it up and like maybe just reach out to other doctors who have, or just like be able to, for them to just have that own autonomy to like, hey, I'm not being able to serve this patient, what do I need to do? To kind of not, it kind of puts the responsibility on the physician, not the community member, to have to navigate healthcare in that kind of fashion. Just, yeah, it's frustrating when doctors are just kind of lazy about their job.
Okay. Any questions?
I actually have a question. I just wanted to know, and it goes back to when we first were talking about for this half an hour topic, when it was trans is no longer a mental illness, but it's going to be a condition or like a sexual condition. I just wanted to know what your thoughts and feelings or perspectives are regarding it being trans being called a condition.
I feel like I would prefer it not be a condition, but in this like situation, it is kind of a dance of like the lesser evils, and as Alejandra I think had also brought up earlier, it being linked in that way would benefit the community, because then it creates space for minors to have even more autonomy, and also just the fact that trans people disproportionately face like STIs and HIV and things of that nature. It'll all be in one spot, or like one navigation, I'm hoping, ideally. So they're able to get those needs met as well as their primary care is met, and it's all in the same space. So the accessibility and the proximity factor and the gap within that is kind of closed. So people are really able to be themselves and live well, basically.
Like a
without having
one-stop
to jump
shop,
through it. Kind of like a one-stop shop.
It's called a condition, but it encompasses kind of everything that would be needed under that term.
Right, exactly. And the community would be aware of it, and they wouldn't have to go search out for it, because it's all just right there. And so once it's right there, why wouldn't I get HIV, STI tested often, and maybe get on PrEP and get my hormones and get all the things basically that I can get.
That makes sense.
I will say though that's it's still frustrating, just because it's like my gender identity has nothing to do with my sexual health, and at least for me. So it's like I don't like that kind of thing where it's like kind of lumping gender and sexuality a bit, and just like assuming that trans people participate in all these kind of things, and or like I have a monolithic kind of experience. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, just because it's like, well, obviously like my sexual health has nothing to do with it. It's like everybody has their own personal sexual health that may or may not have ties with their gender identity, but even then it's weird to think about, because it's like being trans has nothing to do with like sex in general.
Yeah.
This is about Trans Day of Remembrance, and this was an article published in the NBC News November 20th of last year. And it says, cities across the world will glitter with candlelight on Tuesday in honor of Transgender Day of Remembrance. And I wanted to, I was trying to pick issues that are contemporary here in Sacramento. In case y'all don't know, we have a long-standing memorial on Transgender Day of Remembrance to remember trans people like locally and globally that have been murdered or like otherwise are victims of violence. So it says violence against the trans community has risen steadily in recent years, according to Human Rights Campaign. They have tracked 22 people killed so far in the U.S. because of anti-transgender violence in 2018, and then 128 people in the U.S. since 2013. And it says that victims are mostly young, mostly female, and mostly Black. And then there's a quote from Lourdes, I'm not sure. Lourdes.
Yes.
Thank you. My R doesn't do that. Hunter, she is an ED of the social justice group Trans Women of Color Collective, and says that as a Black trans woman, she worries about violence every day, going to the market, going to the store. She says simple things like that, you could lose your life. And then the Human Rights Campaign describes violence against trans people as an epidemic of violence. And then again quotes Hunter saying that we can bring down the numbers of unemployment, we can bring down the numbers of homelessness in our community, and because of those, homelessness, violence, murder, and discrimination, those things are inextricably linked to the violence against trans people. However, Human Rights Campaign is proposing a different strategy for affecting rates of violence. They are arguing that there should be more anti-discrimination policies pertaining to gender identity, and say that 29 states have them, and that this would account for violence against trans people. So I'm wondering what people think about those. Oh, and there's also some comments in here about hate crimes and rates of hate crimes and how they're processed and that kind of thing, which I don't know. I'll try to save my opinions and let you share yours, but I'm just wondering what people think about Trans Day of Remembrance, about strategies for reducing violence against trans women of color. What's really happening here?
I don't know, to be honest.
You don't know.
It's just sad that it just happened. I don't know what is happening and what we can do to reduce it.
I think to touch on what Lourdes was talking about being a black trans woman and being afraid to basically step outside, that kind of ties back into the intersection concept I was bringing up earlier, because as someone that is black and that is queer, I'm non-binary, so my experience is a little bit different from black trans women, and I always center the fact that black trans women have it worse than I do and have it worse than most of us do. Being a part of two intersections that are both historically dehumanized makes it so much easier for violence to be kind of enforced upon you, because no one's going to believe that the violence happened, or if they do believe it, they're not going to care. And so there's kind of layers to it too when you're a black trans woman, because you're trans, you're a woman, and you're black. All those three things are not valued by general society. That's not even debatable. That's just historical. That's just a fact. And so when you're outside just trying to live, and someone might harass you, assault you, and whether it's sexual, physical, deny you services, there's no one there. There's no one specific for you to call to kind of back you up or corroborate your experience. Everything is pretty much catered to devaluing what you're saying and kind of discarding you and making you disposable. You don't have anyone or one like key defender of yourself. You just have to expect that no one is going to have your back and that you have to kind of fend for yourself. And so it really is being scared to step out your door, because what if someone hurts me? And then if they do hurt me, like, who am I going to tell? Who's going to believe me? Who's going to care? They're going to victim shame me and say that I did something to deserve it, and in abundance too. It won't just be one person, it'll be society instantly once they see that I am both black and that I am queer, or that I'm trans, or that I'm a woman, or whatever the case may be. There's like so many things stacked up against people, and so that kind of just ties into everything else, just people's experiences. Like, people can't even step outside, and then you want them to go make appointments to try to get care, and then you're going to deny them. Like, just the gravity of that.
And then I think it's important to note that most of these like murders and violence is done by men, and that it's very much a cultural issue, because kind of touching on what Tuni was mentioning, like just being trans generally is a lot. Being trans person of color, particularly being like a black trans woman, there's a lot of hatred, a lot of confusion, a lot of kind of gaslighting that happens, where it's like everything that you face is something that you personally deal with because of yourself, not because it's a societal issue. So it's like, I know many girls that have had like men literally try to ignite violence towards them because they turned down an offer for anything. Like, I know I've turned down, like, someone complimented me, a man, and then I would be like, I wouldn't reciprocate. Suddenly, like, they're yelling all these slurs at me and calling me ugly, and like, really, because 5 minutes ago you wanted to fuck with me. So it's like, what's the real issue? Is it like your entitlement to our bodies? You're kind of just viewing us as like just like your sex kind of servants, seeing us as like your just basically like in a very dehumanized way. Like, we're not even real people. We're just like those outcasts of society, where we just exist in these spaces, and like it's so hard. I know for me, it's like going through public transportation is one of my biggest worries every day, which is why I kind of still don't really present the way I want to present. It's a lot of anxiety that I face, just because like when I do have a full face of makeup, like suddenly I'm the center of attention. Suddenly people are looking at me, and I don't know if it's like they're looking at me as like, oh wow, like she's really pretty, or vice versa. 'Cause it's just it gets a lot, and it has everything to do with how I carry about my life. Like this one thing about safety, it's literally like controlling me, and it sucks that I can't just like be and not worry about it. But it's something that I know many trans girls kind of experience, at least from what I've talked about.
I think you hit on something that men experience, specifically like men that are attracted to trans women. I think society teaches those men that affection and that attraction is not okay. And that
Causes shame.
And then that shame
Turns into
mixed with toxic masculinity and mixed with
Turns into elimination.
Right, turns like I shouldn't be feeling this, so I'm gonna hurt this person because I should be masculine, I should be dominant, and I shouldn't be feeling this way because I'm affectionate towards a trans woman.
Which is what's causing the harm, because it's these
Like a
trans
symptom,
women
yeah.
that are talking to men that are okay with them on undercover, but not okay with them in public.
Yeah.
And so that mixed with men feeling like they're entitled to knowing my entire history as a trans woman. Like, do I disclose that I'm a trans woman? And so that's why when you asked, what can we do to change it? I don't know. As a trans woman, I don't have that same fear of walking down the street and feeling like I'm going to be harmed. Am I going to be sexualized? Of course, but that's because I sexualize myself. I don't know what we can do about that. People are people, and in the Black community, unfortunately, it's how we were raised to kill. Not to kill, but like to harm. We are physically ready for combat because of like our survival.
Yeah, we
like
don't
how
have
we
any
have to.
other resources to know how to navigate that. So things just fester, and when things fester, they tend to come out in violence.
Well, and that's also like a response to anti-Blackness in our
Yes.
society too, right? And I wonder what that might look like to really center like anti-Blackness in anti-transgender like attitudes or conversations or policies, or you know, like
I mean, there's a men factor, but there's also kind of a religious factor,
Yeah.
because a lot of it comes or stems from religion, or at least
For it being
That's-
wrong, just
at least people use that as their excuse, whether or not they're even actual part of that the religion, or they actually follow it. They use, for example, the Bible to try to persecute people, and it has historically been used to kind of persecute people. And when people think that there's a higher power that has created this kind of like rule that you cannot break, and they sincerely believe in this rule, and that rule now shapes the reality of people and their perceptions of people, then that's how you're able to get away with violence like they have been throughout history, and colonization, and things of that nature, and kind of forcing this upon people. And it's just like another act to humanize, basically, and it's caused like this sickness, basically.
yeah. I think that with trans being more open these days, and it being there's more awareness, that it's also causing trans women to be murdered, because people are more aware of what it is and what that looks like. And so it's causing more fear, and especially in the Black community, which is why most Black trans women are suffering, because the lack of education of it being okay or what it is, and the lack of acceptance.
Right.
And I was also going to mention that like these are just like abrupt, like individual based. Like there's also the government very responsible for trans murders that are gone through like healthcare, through housing issues, through a lot of issues. And there was this really good quote. I can't find the quote right now, but it was from like Octavia St. Laurent. She was talking about like the world is actually run by undercover faggots. And what she means by that is like all these people in power seek out trans women. There's actually like a lot of men in power that seek out trans women undercover and sleep with them, but then they create those same policies that disenfranchise us as a community. And it's like her one quote. It's very potent and very like blunt, but that's precisely what she kind of meant. And it was just like one of those things that was like, wow, it's true. And then even in the, if you're wanting to watch like more media-based stuff, watch Pose, because Pose actually does touch on this a bit, where it's basically a show about like trans women of color, particularly Black trans women in the 80s undergoing like the AIDS epidemic, and just the ballroom scene. But there's a lot of like situations in that case where like a kind of like a symbolic man, which is could be represented as like Donald Trump or anybody in Congress that's like conservative, going to like the streets picking up trans women or trans sex workers, but then they're the ones creating policies that like dehumanize us and like prevent us from getting everything we want. So shout out to Octavia because it makes sense.
I wanted to say something unrelated to, well, kind of very related, but very related to my experience as a gay man, that gay men often reproduce anti-transness and misogyny when they experience or they feel attraction towards a trans man in our community, or a gay trans man, or even a trans woman in our community. And I know I personally call that shit out all the time around my circle of friends and say, that's not okay, like, don't say that. You need to understand, like, you know, like, our queer community perpetuates anti-transness as well. And so we need to also, I think, call that shit out immediately, especially when our brothers and sisters are being murdered. And sometimes the violence is on our own hands as a community, for sure, when it comes to sexualizing trans people and trans bodies.
Yeah, I didn't touch on that actually. Last week, a trans woman of color was beaten by 5 gay men at West Hollywood. And like this was recent, and then it's like you could look at this historically, where like Black trans women were leading like the whole queer rights, queer movement, and then it suddenly turned into gay marriage, and suddenly cis gay men are like the forefront to that. And it's just, it really digs into like how gay men can often perpetuate erasure and or just general violence. And I know the reason why I kind of figured out that I was trans, because I just could not connect with the gay community, and there was just something like, for some reason I always feel like I'm always excluded, always etc. And then I was like, oh, I'm just a girl, I get it now. And so it kind of gets into that kind of like framework where gay, honestly, like in my experience, gay men have actually been the most violent so far. And so it's very an intra-community kind of thing.
Thank you. Any like strategies for like more just futures, advice for mental health providers, for allies, how to be an ally?
I know like a lot of people, this is kind of like the premise of our march that we had earlier, with like Give Us Our Roses. A lot of people are always saying like trans women are women, trans women matter, but none of them like do anything about it other than perpetuate, just like talk about the issues. Like when you see a trans woman being harassed, like step up, please. Like I know I would appreciate if someone was like had my back in that moment, where I just didn't feel like I had to carry the world on my back and like deal with it myself. So pretty much doing that, and then also like just being able to provide us financial support when you can. I say financial support just because it's like one of the biggest issues I've seen with like many trans women of color is just they need money to survive. So if someone's like shares a GoFundMe account to try to get their surgery and or needs funds to see a doctor because they can't pay for a lift, like just if you have the money, like pay it forward and just be able to contribute financially. And I think that's like most just like things, little things that you can do, because those like $5 will make a giant difference because hopefully other folks will also donate. And just being able to provide us support and also forget, like, people usually only care about us when we're dead versus when we're alive and like trying to survive. It's like, like I know that I've seen many like headlines of like another Black trans woman found dead, and it's like there's Black trans women living right now that you could be supporting, and so she could be best supported versus like being another headline.
Yeah, I think like in some ways Trans Day of Remembrance is this like largely, at least in this community, is like largely like a white cisgender people mourning the murder of like trans women of color, you know, and it's like, I mean, for me it feels super icky, and you know, you talked on, just touched on the Still Here March, and I wonder if anyone would like to share a bit about how that, the direction that we're moving here in our community around, you know, investing our energy into resistance and into like life rather than mourning.
I thought that was a really powerful march that we did. I went out of my way to invite like 5 or 6 of my cis friends and like, you need to show up for this, and they did. And I think as cis folks, like, we need to show up to these spaces. We need to post on our social media that we are here. We need to like vocally be there for our community and for our trans brothers and sisters. Like, if we're not there and putting our bodies in the way and in front of them so that they can experience less harm, we are not doing our jobs as allies. We need to put ourselves in danger for our brothers and sisters, and that's the only way how we're going to create like a more equitable society in which, yeah, we'll be accepted, and that they realize that these people are valuable.
I like that you said like put ourselves in danger, because like black and brown trans people are in danger like every single
And it
day,
could be physical
right?
danger.
Like
it could be like political danger. It could be like danger of like losing your job as an administrator for some fancy place. Like you, like whatever danger you put yourself in, it needs to be, you know,
A real risk.
Yeah,
a risk.
because like we're like with Ebony, like she was detained and arrested because of protest, a peaceful protest. And like once a trans person a Black trans person enters like the anything revolving the prison industrial complex, it's a nightmare. Because that system is particularly designed to like break and
you
kill.
Yeah.
And so it's like we can't even participate in our own protests because there's the danger that we'll be like enter that system and just kind of be fully policed and fully harmed. So that's why our like cis people need to be not in the forefront, like let us have our space, but it's still like being able to have us alongside and just kind of being there for us.
Yeah.
Final comments.
Just like changing your language, trying to be less a binary in your language, and not assuming what someone's identity is based on how they appear or how they present. Always ask. It's better to ask than be wrong. I think that's really crucial and important. Always introduce yourself with your name and your pronouns, and thank people for offering your name and pronouns to have some kind of positive reinforcement when it comes to trying to make that more normalized in culture. And I mean, don't do it in a creepy way, but like find trans folks so they do exist and like be friends with them and like learn about their like background and their story, because that's what motivates anyone really to become a part of anything, is when we encounter someone, whether they're our family members or our partners or our friends or whoever, who are from a different demographic than we are. We're a lot more for that demographic when we have someone in our life who is reflected in that, and that'll keep you accountable, to that support, and also just being another companion for someone who may not have that, and knowing that you're probably more ethical than the general population, because not only are trans people lacking that camaraderie, but we're also more susceptible to being abused and being manipulated by people when we're already so disenfranchised, which can kind of just retain us at the bottom. Like, trans folks do so much, try to survive day by day, and that makes it very easy for someone to manipulate them, and kind of take whatever resources that they have until where they have absolutely nothing, and now they're left without, and now they have trust issues and everything else that I've mentioned before. And so just really being human and humanizing trans people because they're dehumanized on a normal basis.
Thank you. Any other comments from the front of the room? No. Any questions for folks about anything overall?
I don't know how to phrase this correctly, so I'm just going to take a stab at it. But you mentioned collectively sort of what you just mentioned, something that I could do or we could do, which I really appreciate, because that's what I want to know.
Mm-hmm.
But it would be helpful for me to also know, if anybody's willing to say this, like, what do you want? I mean, what do you want from us? I don't mean just like us counselors. I mean us people that aren't transgender.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you want from us maybe today and tomorrow, not 10 years, 20, 30, 40 years, because that's clearer to me than the more immediate. How could we be better allies? How could we be better, I don't know, better friends, better community members, whatever?
I feel like just being genuine, like genuinely wanting to be a part of somebody's life, not assuming like you have to want to do something in particular because we're trans. Like,
Right.
We're not
I'm a fucking
charity.
person. Like,
Yeah.
Token trans friend?
yeah, like I'm your
Okay.
trans friend. I'm the token person.
Exactly. That's
Like
what
do
it
the
is.
things that you want to do
We have
because
hobbies,
you want
we
to do
have-
them.
Mm-hmm.
Feel good about doing it for yourself. Like, because if you don't, my life's gonna go on.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the only thing I can advise. So if you're going to be a part of a trans person's life, then don't make them a spectacle. Be their freaking friend. Be a genuine person, and they can appreciate that. I think that's what anyone wants, to be treated right.
Mm-hmm.
Transparent about it. I think Alejandro was touching on to like let them know that you're not for transphobia in any kind of way. Like I want the friend that I know is gonna be like, fuck you if someone tried to try me in public. I can defend myself and I know I can, but everybody's story is not like that. Not everybody has the autonomy and like just I don't know, just like the I'm gonna fuck you up if you fuck with me type of attitude like I do. And it's nice to have someone that's cis who is not part of you, who you know for sure is gonna have your back. It's not any question. I don't have to question that you're gonna be my friend and that you're gonna have my back and you're gonna have these conversations with other cis people, so I don't have to have a conversation and re-traumatize myself. That's another thing. Well-meaning people like, oh, well, here's my friend, come meet them, and then have us like spill out our guts. No, it's your job to make sure that whatever information you get from a trans person or anyone who's from any other demographic, that you're not only listening, but you're retaining and then you're reteaching, because otherwise it's a waste of my time if I have to sit up here and tell you things and you're like, oh, okay, that was cute, I'm glad, I feel like a better person, and like you have the information, and then now that information is fallen and eventually fades away in your mind and it's not manifesting into anything else. Take that information and actually like and they're gonna probably be uncomfortable too, but at least you're not trans. Have these conversations with these folks about trans people, and you might get some pushback, and they might be transphobic, but again, you're not trans, so who cares? Continue to have those conversations and let them know that this is what it is and this is what it's not, kind of a thing, and just go from there. That's what I personally would appreciate. Just someone having my back and I'm not having the question. Like I could see like on your post or in person that you're gonna have my back. And like you're
With
real
or
about
without
it.
me not being
Yeah, with or
present.
without me being present.
Yeah.
Right.
I think those are things that I do daily with like friends and community that I know and cis people that I know, because I mean I'm immersed in a queer community here at work, but in all of my life I'm not immersed in queer community, right? And so I really have to address anti-queerness and anti-transness when it comes up. If it's in a meeting with people from UC Davis, whether it's at a festival with my friends and they say like tranny this or tranny that, and I have to like snap it in the butt, you know, like
Or share an inappropriate meme.
Right.
You're like, what?
right, or share an inappropriate meme in a group chat, and I'm like, hey, that's an anti-trans meme, don't show that, that's not cute, let's talk about that. Or like not having conversations in which I out my trans friends, like, oh, my trans friend, da 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 da. It's like, no, my friend, and it's their opportunity to disclose
Right.
their trans identity. Like, I'm just not tokenizing my coworkers or my friends as trans in conversation, because they're more than just trans, right? It's like the little things, like, again, introducing my pronouns, and when people say like pronoun, and like, all right, let's explain what a pronoun is really quickly. Let's take you back to 3rd grade, and then I have to have a conversation like, this is important because, instead of saying, oh, just dismiss it, right? So having these like intentional conversations that help increase the competency and yeah, the competency that my friends have around trans and queer community, even if they're cis, straight, or queer, because we know that not all queers are great. Yeah. I mean that's a whole deeper conversation around like what passing means and what complete transition means for somebody, and all of that stuff. That's a very nuanced conversation.
Right. I feel like I'm a trans person and I identify as being like a trans woman, but like non-binary. So like for me personally, my goal is not to pass. I don't want to be cis. I don't want to be read as cis. I want to be read as queer as fuck. And so that's just me personally. Of course, that comes with like, no matter where I go, no matter how I present, I'm always gonna be read as different in every space. Because I'm a 6'1", broad-shouldered girl. So it's like with a banging body, right? But it's just like I know for myself, I'm never gonna be passed, but that's also not my goal. And I know a lot of trans people that their goal isn't to pass, but I also know a lot of trans people where their goal is to pass because it's like safety, it's dysphoria, it's a lot of kind of things that they kind of want for themselves. Ultimately, whether or not a person passes or not, and I don't like using the word pass, I like to use this assumed, because it's not whether we're doing enough, it's whether how you're seeing us. Because like I see myself as how I see myself, but how other people see me, that's your issue, that's not my issue.
Like, let's not contribute to my dysphoria.
Right, like I'm relaxed, I'm fine, because like I won't be dysphoric for a minute and I'm even presenting any type of way. So it's like, it's not really my issue, it's like how other people perceive me. That's the issue, and how they react to that perception. And so I feel like it could be harder, like if someone's like trying to, like, I know for me, I don't feel comfortable using the men's restroom, but I also don't feel comfortable using the women's restroom, because it's like, when I first walk in, people will be like, oh my god, that's a man. And then I'm like, let's not talk about this right now. And so it's like, that's where it could also be kind of sketch. So it's like, ultimately, I mean, again, it's very hard for different movies, and everybody has a very different kind of view of it. Some people, like, they'll want to have all these surgeries, all the cosmetic changes to be able to be assumed as cisgender. But although some people are like, fuck it, I don't want to. And that's not my problem. That's like how other people that's their problem. Like, this is funny quotes, like, your problems with me are not my problems, they're your problems. Of course, if you try to bring that up with me, then you're gonna have a problem. But yeah, I would say it's very different for everybody. I know for me personally though, it could be hard, just cause it's like, I'm in a space where I don't fit in the binary. So it's like, that's a whole other discussion though, with like, just like the full binary of both genders.
When you're talking about trans people, you want to use trans as an adjective because it is, so we're not a trans, we're trans people, or trans whatever other, like trans woman, trans man, so you want to use that language, because then it can kind of become passively dehumanizing, and we're in this space, so I know that's not what you're trying to do, but that it might maybe read as that, so always keep in mind that trans is just an adjective, and that's going to be added on to something else and not by itself.
My apologies.
Yeah, you're good. And the second part, I'm also non-binary, so not every trans person is going to have to go through a transition or wants to have any kind of changes. So for me, my gender identity is just the simple fact that I was assigned male at birth based off of the fact that I have a penis. I don't feel that I'm a man, so that automatically makes me trans. Specifically, I'm non-binary because I don't feel that I am a man nor that I'm a woman. I am just myself, and that's my gender for me. And there also are non-binary people who may choose to have hormones as part of their journey, but that's not, a set thing. I'm one of the individuals who am not on hormones and don't foresee myself taking hormones, and how I present just varies on how I feel. Basically, it's usually a mix of masculine and feminine and other, because I feel like that itself is a binary and limiting, and that I'm more than just masculine and feminine. The third thing that I wanted to hit, and I remembered, was that kind of touching on surgeries and stuff. When you kind of asked about, like, I think you had like a race component to the passing. That's actually important to bring up too, because a lot of the surgeries and a lot of the surgeons, again, are white, and a lot of the features that people are kind of sold are Eurocentric and European features, opposed to the features of their actual people. And that is important to know about. So when people do transition and they're looking, that's limited too, and they have to kind of gamble with that, or sometimes they may have self-hating, and that might be good for them because they want to look more European. So there's different things like that that also have nuance to kind of what is going to be considered past, and also what's going to be deemed as beautiful when someone is trying to transition and maybe trying to reach a certain point. So
as a trans woman, I've gone through a lot of transitional stuff, and I used to find myself in spaces wanting to be accepted as a regular female, or feeling that way, and that's something I don't feel anymore. I've accepted and embraced my transness and whatever passing is, and respecting my trans folks however they come, and so I think that having like that's like this limited idea of like what trans is what could be wrong with communities, and educating yourself on more ideas. And I know that you clearly didn't have an objective to offend anyone, but like those little minimized observations of what trans is what becomes offensive to trans people, because these are 3 different forms of trans right here, and that's what it looks like. This is what it looks like, and it could look like something else in another space.